My word du jour is corruption. Corruption is a word with two distinctly different meanings. Our understanding of what corruption means depends on a variety of factors that decide whether we view corruption negatively as a reason to lock up criminals or positively as a reason to elect the corrupt to absolute power. The defining factor that determines how we each understand what corruption means is an American education. The traditional understanding of corruption is defined in one line as dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those in power, typically involving bribery. Traditionally, most understand corruption as a form of criminal dishonesty undertaken by a person or an organization that is entrusted in a position of authority to acquire illicit benefits or abuse power for personal gain. Political corruption occurs when an office holder or other governmental employee acts in an official capacity for personal gain, or when a PAC lobbies to effect governmental position away from the good of the electorate towards the benefit of a foreign government or agency. Corruption includes legally quantifiable activities like bribery, influence peddling, embezzlement, sexual offences, exploitation of the weak, and the commission of corrupt lawyers to effect statutes in pursuit of criminal ends. Historically, corruption had a broader meaning concerned with an activity's impact on morals and societal well-being. For example, the Greek philosopher Socrates was condemned to death in part for corrupting the young, by teaching the value of critical thinking over dumb compliance, and in so doing, interfering with the authoritarian narrative of conformity. But for now, let's examine the meaning of corruption along the two binary foundational pillars of legal interpretation. When is corruption legal and why? When is corruption an election-winning quality and why? In the first instance, consider the spin-free meaning of corruption. Corruption is a criminal behavior where a criminal class motivated by criminal intent pursue profit by methods of criminality that fall under the legal definition of corruption. Second is the perception of corruption as a meritorious quality so valued it becomes the single issue voters choose when electing the supreme leader. Because we have now raised corruption to be the most valued quality for electing the leader class, let's consider how a majority came to be influenced towards this reinvention of what corruption means to that influenced majority who have enthusiastically elected a corrupt leader class for reasons relating to the propagandized dumbing down of a befuddled majority. How we understand the role of corruption for leaders appealing to the electorate depends on how the majority understand a few related words. This interpretation determining whether corruption as a leadership quality is seen as a strength or a flaw. First is anarchy, how we value the importance of a working, justice-based rule of law that applies equally to all, that egalitarian, consensual legislature by which any society chooses a leader class to govern for the benefit of all. When the corrupt leader class win absolute power to replace rule of law with a form of anarchy, the outcome is as predictable as it has been on every previous occasion when a dumbed-down propagandized majority chose the most corrupt few to take the reins of absolute power, without any legal oversight. One example would be a corrupt seditionist raising a terrorist army to stage a coup in which the vice president is threatened with a noose by corrupt citizens who are then jailed in accordance with law, after which a vote for corruption leads to a change in law, resulting in freedom for the former terrorists now designated freedom fighters. Proud Nazi boys who may now expect positions in government where this form of corruption is valued. Second, in how many Americans value corruption is their understanding of success. The US is a capitalist system in which, for the majority who identify as Americans, the pinnacle of success is wealth accumulation. The richer you are, the more successful you are in the eyes of those who aspire to becoming rich. Any achievement that is not accompanied by enormous profit is not success at all. I want to be a billionaire so bad. We vote for leaders who have proven leadership qualities that bring success, at a time and place in a society where the accumulation of wealth represents the pinnacle of the pyramid of what matters most, where the richest, the oligarchy, occupy 100% of the influence over how the majority view what matters most. Success for the majority is placing material wealth accumulation above all other considerations. The most successful leader is the richest one in a national ideology trained to not conflate the accumulation of enormous wealth with corruption. They believe corruption is the necessary component for the accumulation of enormous wealth. So why in God's name wouldn't they vote for corrupt government? It makes perfect sense when you see with your own eyes on Fox and CNN how well crime pays. Only a fool wouldn't vote for the most corrupt to lead. Corruption by a small minority winning absolute power in government is nothing new. We can look back to multiple historical instances in which a corrupt minority operates similar methodologies to win power, the past, as ever, predicting the future. Leaders who have defeated existing legislation to apply their own amendments that legitimize criminal corruption that then become no longer criminal, lasting precisely the same amount of time that the corrupt oligarchy control the legislative process before ending the same way that this form of corrupt leadership ends every time. Absolute power predicts the outcome absolutely predictably. Absolute power for a leader class elected on the single issue of corruption pedigree arrives by convincing the majority of the most easily influenced, the thirstiest for life-changing abuse, to suck on down that special needs Kool-Aid for the mentally ill in 3-word, easy-to-digest chunks. Gulp, gulp, gulp. We see from historical precedent that the corrupt who win power invariably follow the same tried and proven methodology from beginning to end of that cycle. The most corrupt target the least ethically literate with the formulaic cocktail of propagandized techniques informed by the same handbook. Old, rich white men applying forced indoctrination on children and the blind faith consumers of televised expert news summary, creating the next generation of conservative nationalist dullards by adding a splash of religion, a dash of nationalism, and a whole mess of training in stupid to dumb down the poorest. A system contrived to prevent and silence any critical thinking that might contraindicate the authoritarian narrative. The authoritarian narrative in which capitalism is the best and only choice for Americans. Capitalism cannot prosper optimally with regulation. Capitalist success is measured exclusively by money. Those who have the most are the most successful. Curiously, the majority who voted do not have abundant, enormous wealth. In the United States, according to the Peter G. Peterson Foundation report from 2023, 13% of Americans, 43 million people, lived in poverty in 2023, while 15% of Americans, 49 million people, lived poverty adjacent. This does not factor in the number living in enormous crippling debt. Social Security was the most effective anti-poverty program in 2023, lifting nearly 28 million people out of poverty. Refundable tax credits, which include the earned income tax credit and refundable portion of the child tax credit, were the second most effective anti-poverty program, lifting 6.4 million people from poverty. At the same time, medical expenses and payments associated with the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, a payroll tax, brought 7.4 million and 4.6 million people into poverty, respectively. The prospects for successful capitalism clearly suffer from this federal overreach, giving money from hard-working, successful capitalists to nearly 28 million people. That seems obvious. If 7.4 million people cannot afford their medical care, then they should get a proper job. Why not form a government branch called Doge to stop this unfair tax on the rich, who drive the capitalist success story? Almost 13 million people brought into poverty by medical expenses and payroll tax is a good start to cutting the fat of our government bending towards socialism. Another good reason to vote for the corrupt is their willingness to bankrupt the ill. Who needs those suckers draining the economy when you can elect the world's richest man to deregulate the anti-capitalist, socialist oversight on our right to revere the rich who know best? Want to be a successful capitalist? Then watch and learn from the oligarchs. They know the secret. What percentage of Americans does this ideology of unregulated capitalist excess sit comfortably with? We know from the social psychology experiments conducted by Stanley Milgram at Yale University in the 1960s how far people will go when ordered to obey an authority figure, even when it goes against their personal beliefs. Milgram and others in similar social psychology experiments show that conservatively 80% of Americans are incapable of critical thinking. Conservatively, 80% of Americans will follow the authoritarian, fear-based narrative they're told is their only choice. In that metaphorical nirvana image of the baby swimming in pursuit of the dollar bill hook, trawling tantalizingly out of their grasping reach, America's youth raised to drown, chasing the dollar. Unregulated capitalism sold to the poor and poverty-adjacent majority in the form of glorified corruption as the American way takes its optimal form in three-word idiot repetition, the tried and proven method for impacting on the 80% demographic for whom this "I'm with stupid" narrative works. Just 3 words. The moronic repetition of 3-word nationalist tropes that works on conservatively 80% of Americans, creating a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter patriot. The red, white, and blue tribe of capitalists whose ethical conscience doesn't run, linked by a common love of money and absolute submissive loyalty to the racist rich old white man religious patriarchy. The tribe who understand corruption is the most valuable requirement for their money über alles leader class. The trope-topical tribe who know what they know when choosing their leaders in their version of an election. Corruption is strength. It's a tough world out there. There is evil everywhere threatening our national security. We need a fixer who is strong to defend us in the fight against our enemies. If the Reds don't get us, then the terrorists will, or the Muslims, or the Muslim communist terrorists and their ululating women. Only the strong survive. We need a strong leader. Might is right. The most corrupt liar is always the safest bet for a strong leader. No one wants a nice guy president, some dumb intellectual book-reading socialist concerned with woke ridiculous civil rights arguing for equal shares of life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. For the lazy, worthless indigents who expect your taxes to pay for their health care. Try that in a small mind. What is corruption? I'll tell you. Expecting honest, hard-working, white country Christian folk to pay for illegal immigrants to be given houses, jobs and free health care so they can come here and steal our jobs and our Taylor Swift concert tickets, then call theyselves Jesus. Throw them out, build that wall, lock them up, kill them all. Blue lives matter. Fight, fight, fight. Win, win, win. The greatest ever. Read my lips. Understanding what corruption means is a binary choice. One is the positive association of why corruption is the American way to this Milgram 80%, free from any critical thinking that is superfluous in their blind faith reality. Voting for corrupt government is not going to make the lives of the poorest majority who voted immeasurably worse. It is going to make America great again by freeing capitalism from the extremist constraints of those evil liberals, imposing regulations and oversight on our right to continue our growth towards our manifest destiny that is Christian economic prosperity. In South Africa during apartheid years, when the majority of the designated electorate voted for the laws of apartheid, a class of voter emerged known as poor whites. These were the least educated, poorest whites who made the most committed supporters of apartheid, because racist, corrupt government represented opportunity for the lowest socio-economic class of unskilled white to gain some advantage over the better skilled black workers. For this group, corruption of the racist type was the reason they voted for a corrupt government. A single black and white example of how corruption can be the single best reason to vote for a corrupt government, including when voters have a common threat to unite them behind a racist cause that benefits patriots. Foreigners have always been the softest targets for nationalist racism. Today, we welcome in this supremely corrupt government, whose collective pedigree and corruption is their most notable qualification for rendering the big leadership decisions that will determine the future prospects for the United States as well as the entire planet. The first executive decision by the convicted felon elected leader was to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement. Drill, baby, drill. Minutes after assuming power, President Donald Trump issued roughly 1,500 pardons and commuted the sentences of 14 of his supporters in connection with the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Trump commuted the sentences of individuals associated with the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers who were convicted of seditious conspiracy. He then issued a full and complete unconditional pardon to all other individuals convicted of offenses related to events that occurred at or near the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, a category that included people who assaulted law enforcement officers. Enrique Tarrio, the Proud Boys leader convicted of seditious conspiracy, was released within hours from FCI Pollock, a medium-security federal prison in Louisiana. Tarrio was serving 22 years in federal prison after he was convicted of seditious conspiracy. That was, until today, a criminal offense. Trump, who stopped the Steele lie, prepared the stormtroopers for the coup attempt on January 6 that included a noose and gallows threat to hang the vice president should he not join Trump's coup, was not arrested. Instead, the law of the United States was amended. The majority of Americans who voted chose Donald Trump as leader, not because they were unaware of his corruption or even his lifelong legacy of corruption, but because of it. The majority of Americans in the election identify with corruption as the single issue they want representing America for their version of what America is. Quite possibly, these conservative evangelo-fascist voters are smarter than many of us give them credit for. They vote honestly, knowing corruption mirrors what they most want to be themselves, beneficiaries of corruption, choosing the leaders whose prejudices resonate most harmoniously with theirs. A genius billionaire who promises to fix broken America overnight, heralding an era of prosperity for all white Americans, unembarrassed by any reminder of his historical lies showing the nature of his character. The Milgram 80%, who chose blind faith over critical thinking, who instead respond like dogs to a high whistle to three-word racist, misogynist tropes by which they have welcomed in corruption as the single issue essential for winning the presidency. This is the wall, as I see it, the two sides, the North and the South in American culture 2025. The 80% for whom corruption means success, for whom stupid means smart, idiot means genius, kindness means weakness, and money means everything. And the rest, the almost invisible, almost silenced minority who know what happens every single time the most corrupt seize absolute power. Hashtag marker made America corrupt again.